Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I'm here with Jenin Younes, who is a litigation counsel at the New Civil Liberties Alliance. Jenin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, I should say welcome back to the show. That'd be far more accurate. The reason that I got in touch was because I saw that you have begun working for the New Civil Liberties Alliance. I don't know how recent that is, but that's fairly recent, I think.
A little over. I actually started there probably right after I talked to you last time. So it was like April of 21. So I've been here for almost a year and a half now.
Oh, okay. So you're not just getting settled in and being given the big new case.
No.
No. So yeah, the reason I got in touch is because I can't remember what point it was. Last year, I think it was. And anyway, the US government decided to announce that they were going to be working with Facebook in order to tell people, or to tell Facebook who was misinformation and who should be removed from the platform, or who should be prevented from speaking. And I remember being absolutely horrified, thinking, isn't someone going to sue? Like, isn't somebody going to raise this in court? And recently, I saw that the New Civil Liberties Alliance, along with a host of other people whose names I will get up here now, have raised said lawsuit. Thankfully, so do you want to tell people? Yeah, you'll do a much better job of explaining what the lawsuit actually is than I will.
Sure. So I can give. So the background information is, as you noted, the members of the federal government, especially the Biden administration, have been making threats, basically not just telling Facebook what to do. And by the way, it's not just Facebook, it's very broad. It's like all tech companies, so Twitter, YouTube, and this even reaches further into like e-commerce platforms, instant messaging systems. So it's just extremely sort of intrusive in terms of the reach that it has. So they've been basically threatening them with regulation or even other forms of legal action if they don't spread purveyors of so-called misinformation about COVID. And, some of the things they cite are like saying that masks don't work or saying the vaccines aren't as good as advertised, which we now know is true. This is really core First Amendment speech. I imagine most people know that in the United States we have the First Amendment, which says that the government can't censor individuals based on viewpoint. So there can be certain kinds of restrictions on speech, but the government can't be in the business of deciding this perspective is valid and this perspective isn't. And so there were a couple of other lawsuits, but they sued the tech companies. And they did cite, that their theory was actually that the tech companies were essentially arms of the government because they were doing the government's bidding. I brought the first lawsuit a little bit earlier in March. That was called Changizi versus Department of Health and Human Services, suing the federal government and not the private companies, and saying that the government's coercion of the companies was a First Amendment violation. The judge unfortunately dismissed that lawsuit in May, and he basically said, you can't show that your plaintiffs, who were three people who had been suspended by Twitter, two and ultimately permanently, one temporarily, for saying, the sorts of things that I think are completely valid, criticizing lockdowns and mass mandates, vaccine mandates. You can't prove that your plaintiffs were censored because of the government. Twitter was doing some censoring of misinformation before the timeline you point to. The federal government had started making these statements in early 21. They had been censoring some misinformation in 2020. So therefore, you just haven't proven causation here and threw the lawsuit out. On the same day, by pure coincidence, the attorneys general of Louisiana and Missouri brought a really similar lawsuit, but theirs was much more expansive. So theirs actually doesn't just cover COVID misinformation. It's also, there's been censorship of information about, people who think that Trump won the election, which I don't think, but it's still something people should be able to say. The Hunter Biden laptop story, for instance, and now it's climate so-called misinformation, abortion misinformation. So this is really viewpoint-based. It's trying to, silence a certain perspective. By the way, much of which I happen to disagree with. I'm pro-choice, and I don't think Trump won the election. But these people have a right to air their views. They told me they borrowed from my complaint and a couple others, got this idea, and then they have, theirs is really good. They had a very expansive lawsuit, and then they had five private plaintiffs who wanted to join and they thought would be good, but attorneys general can't represent private plaintiffs. So we partnered with them so that we could represent those people Well, we're not representing one, and there's another lawsuit who's representing Jim Hoft, who's the founder of Gateway Pundit. So we're representing Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, who are two of the people who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. I can explain later what that is if you want. And Aaron Kheriaty, who was a professor in California. He was fired for not getting the vaccine. And a fourth woman named Jill Hines, who leads an organization called Health Freedom Louisiana, which is trying to fight back against mandates, vaccine and mask mandates.
Okay, so that's a great overview. So
Yeah.
the first thing I want to know is what was the like actual original grievance in the lawsuit? Is it just that people have been censored as a result of U.S. government policy, like that the government has lent on big tech platforms to have people removed because of things that the government has considered to be things you shouldn't be allowed to say online? Is it literally that?
That's one of the claims. So that's sort of the most direct First Amendment claim. There's also, and I don't know if you have a similar principle in the UK, but there's something called a chilling effect that is widely recognized. So if people fear that they're going to be punished for voicing their views, then they don't voice those views, and that's called chilling, and that's considered a First Amendment violation in and of itself, which is one reason why I think the court was very, very wrong here. So, I'm an avid Twitter user. I don't say certain things about the vaccines because I'm afraid that I'll lose my account. And Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff, after they wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, which was they wrote in October of 2020, and was basically a call to end lockdowns and instead to embrace something called they call focus protection, which is, their argument is that lockdowns hurt the most vulnerable, not sort of physically vulnerable, but the poor, the working class, young people, giving basically no benefit to them because they face little risk from the disease. Well, they actually fail to protect the people who need it. They're not really geared towards, protecting people who are physically vulnerable to COVID. Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, who are high up in the NIH, immediately singled this out for criticism, said that these people need to be silenced, and there were various mechanisms through which the declaration was sort of suppressed. So through searching in Google, it became very hard to find. I believe it was even taken down from Facebook at some point. Videos of those two talking with Ron DeSantis, this is sort of separate from the Great Barrington Declaration, but they had a discussion with Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, about mask mandates for children and the harms and lack of benefits. That video was taken down, when they're being targeted publicly by people in the Biden administration, which I think is really disturbing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about Anthony Fauci, really, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you said that the chilling effect is a First Amendment principle. That's fascinating. I'm curious as to why no one has brought this kind of lawsuit to one of these social media companies in the past. Is it literally been because it was a private company, and the difference here is because it's the government leaning on the private company?
Exactly. So the First Amendment doesn't apply to private companies. And so there are actually a lot of libertarians who don't like this lawsuit at all and who don't like the idea. Their theory, which I think is incorrect, is that, the companies are actually sort of working in they're collaborating with the government, which is okay. They say if private companies they like the Biden administration, they're all left wing, they all have the same aims. If they want to do that, they can do that. There's nothing that prevents that. I think that's an incorrect interpretation of the First Amendment. I don't think that the government, should be driving censorship at all. I don't think they should be having any involvement in what private companies are doing. And we know that this isn't really what the companies would want to be doing themselves because they weren't doing it before the government started threatening them. If it was beneficial to them from an economic standpoint, which of course ultimately that's what all private companies are there for, they would have been censoring people way more before. And the court, again, in the original case that I brought, didn't accept the representations of the plaintiffs that they had noticed censorship went way up once this campaign started. He thought that, he maybe would have reached a different conclusion if we had provided statistics, but that's almost impossible with that. One of the ironies of this is, if you throw the lawsuit out at this stage, we can't get to discovery, which would provide us with the information that we need in order to substantiate, the allegations, but he didn't. It puts us in a catch-22, basically. Mm. But the judge in the Missouri case, it's the Missouri Attorney General's case. It's actually in Louisiana. the judge there is allowing it to get to discovery. So we're actually in discovery right now.
Okay, that is exciting. So what sort of thing are you subpoenaing for? Are you asking for? Are you like, I assume any communication between anyone at Twitter or what social media companies are involved in the lawsuit? Twitter, I assume. Google.
Twitter,
did you
Facebook,
mention?
YouTube. Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I don't think Google is. Also, we're not suing any of the private companies. So we would want, I can't speak very specifically exactly because we're sort of in proceedings right now. But theoretically speaking, what one would want is proof, first of all, through communications, that the federal government is threatening them or coercing them or exerting pressure, and that, or I guess that the companies don't really want to do this. If there was an indication that, well, we have to do this because otherwise we're going to suffer repercussions and it'll be worse for us in the long run, that would be very valuable. And I suspect is the case. The question of whether anyone put it in writing, I don't know. We'll have to find that out.
Yeah. Something tells me some of those records might start to disappear.
Yeah. Well, as you may be aware, there was since I filed the Changizi lawsuit, we're actually asking the judge to reopen it based on some newly discovered evidence. So there were emails from the Department of Homeland Security that were made public, I think, around in June, and those showed the creation of a disinformation governance board, which sounds very Orwellian, and it's sort of designed again to have the government involved in social media censorship. That came forward, and then the emails from the CDC from 2 weeks ago, or not, the emails weren't from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, emails from the CDC were released that showed, again, quite a bit of at least collaboration, that they're directing social media companies to do this. And one very interesting thing we found was, they had a list of specific accounts or tweets. Actually, not so much the accounts, but tweet. And one was from Naomi Wolf, who many people may be familiar with as a critic of the COVID policy and vaccines. And she was permanently suspended from Twitter just a few weeks after the CDC had flagged that post for Twitter and said, tweets like this are a problem. So again, that's, further, there's a lot of smoke here.
Yeah. Where can I find this CDC story? With the CDC, you said came out 2 weeks ago. I just want to look this up because, that is amazing.
Yeah, it was. I have many links I can send you. It's an organization called, I think, ADS, I believe. FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and I have links all over.
Will it be on your Twitter?
Oh, yeah, I definitely linked to it at some point, somewhere around 2 weeks ago. It's also in the complaint, the latest version of the Missouri complaint. We added that to it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have a look for it, and I'll put it in the link, the description below for people. Sorry, sometimes I just try and pull stuff up if I can find it quickly. Here it is. Twitter suspends Naomi Wolf. You've tweeted it. Yeah.
I tweeted the whole link to the entire PDF. It's quite a few pages.
Yeah. So she put, and then she tweeted. Blah, blah. Yeah, to be honest, it still baffles me that we just accept that a handful of billionaires are totally fine to decide what we can and can't see, and then when it turns out in this case with your lawsuit that the government are the ones leaning on them to decide, it's just who in their fucking right mind thinks that's a good system?
I don't know. I don't know.
Can you imagine what the New York Times would have said if this was 4 years ago, right? And the Trump administration was leaning on Twitter and Facebook to remove posts.
I know. I mean, if papers like the Times or the New Yorker magazine, had any integrity, they would be covering this. But they're not going to because it makes the Biden administration look bad. They're just political. they're just political actors, and the irony is the Democrats accuse the Republicans of just being Fox News, Fox News being the Republicans' mouthpiece, but they're doing exactly the same thing, and arguably even worse, because they're not, to my knowledge, the Republicans are not engaged in this level of censorship of like core political, this has totally skewed the debate. And we know that censorship went back even farther than I realized when I filed the initial lawsuit. So
what did you think initially, and then how far back does it go?
So I became aware. I became very suspicious because I noticed, again, as a Twitter user, I noticed a lot of my friends were getting suspended sort of around the time that Biden, Jennifer Psaki, his press secretary at the time, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, started making these threatening statements to tech companies. And I thought, this can't be a coincidence. All of a sudden, everyone's getting suspended. And then, so that made me suspicious. But now we know more, and we actually know this goes further back and was more of a coordinated effort. Probably, I'm going to guess since like mid-2020, because there was such a crackdown, too, with the Great Barrington Scientists in October 2020.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up what she said this was July 2021, when she said that they're identifying problematic posts for Facebook to censor because they contain misinformation about COVID-19. It's just...
Yeah. That to me is obvious. You have a body of case law where judges, I think this is the right approach. Judges say, we understand if something like this happens, it's going to be hard for any individual to be able to establish that they were censored because of the government. But the government can't go around making these statements, and we're going to presume there's a chilling effect. We're going to presume that people aren't saying things because they're afraid of reprisal. And that's obviously what's happening here. I know it's happening because I'm censoring myself. Yeah. And I talk to my friends on Twitter.
And then so is there precedent? Like, is there case law? Is there previous, I don't know, examples of this happening that you're basing the case on?
That's what, I think that's part of the problem is a lot of judges frankly lack courage. This is sort of new territory. We've obviously never had anything like this. You've just never had social media where anybody I can and have gained a huge following, and so I can say something and thousands or sometimes even millions of people say it. That's unprecedented in history. You had sort of this traditional publications or the establishment, and I've drawn the comparison to judges before. If you had the federal government telling the New York Times, you shouldn't publish alternative perspectives about the Cold War or the Iraq War or whatever. That's misinformation and it's dangerous. We would all have been up in arms. Everybody would have been up in arms, certainly the left. And so I think there's something about the nature of it. And of course, it's been hard to get libertarians on board with many of these ideas because they are very married or they've stuck to this idea that it's the private companies. We can't tell private companies what to do. The First Amendment doesn't apply to them. First of all, that's not even what our lawsuit is about. I frankly disagree with that as a matter of philosophy. We live in a real world. This is an unprecedented situation where we have social media. And frankly, a place like Twitter and Facebook and even YouTube, they control the public discourse.
Yeah, it's really because the people that keep getting banned, it's wild, what people are repeatedly getting banned for. Not even specifically related to the COVID stuff, but it just seems that these platforms are getting harsher and harsher and harsher, and they will swing the ban hammer for almost anything. The one that I laughed about recently is that James Lindsay's off Twitter now. He's completely banned permanently.
Well, exactly. And it's funny. There was a woman on there who's a super, radical, woke, whatever, politically correct person who was bragging on there that she had reported him. So that's what you also, one reason you get flagged is because people are reporting you, and there's plenty of people who just are out to get you. I recently, after a spat with somebody on there, I had a couple of tweets later, actually it was one labeled, with a warning. It was ridiculous. And I had a cardiologist I know named Jenin who's very good, very esteemed cardiologist. He had retweeted a study of myocarditis rates following the vaccine, and he was locked out of his account until he deleted the tweet. I mean, we have a cardiologist now being censored for giving information about cardiology because it conflicts with the everyone has to get the vaccine mantra when it's really Orwellian.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to something as complicated as people's health,
yeah.
And it's like a serious form of arrogance to just believe that you are like the truth. It's like,
yep.
it's almost
yep.
like it's like messianic, because
yep.
isn't that that's what Jesus said, right? It's like, I am the light, the way, and the truth, or something like that. That's basically what they're saying. They're like, we are the truth.
Oh, yeah.
That's like that
yep.
Jacinda Ardern. Yeah, I am the science.
I mean, and they keep getting proven wrong again and again and again. They don't listen to anything. They're not willing to take alternative perspectives into consideration. It's just.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
Very.
The lawsuit is really. I'm curious about this chilling effect, though. Actually, I'm going to sidetrack you for a second because I noticed. I'm going to pull this up on my phone here. Two seconds. I noticed the other day on my podcast on Spotify that some of my episodes had been flagged.
Oh wow.
I'm going to find which one it was just for the fun. But so technically, could I claim the chilling effect if I have decided I don't want to talk about certain things because they have they flagged me? Gert van den Bosch,
sure.
Unfortunately, he's only a PhD in virology and only worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's misinformation, apparently. Yeah, there's a few that get flagged. Cynthia McKinney, she was former congresswoman, actually. First black congresswoman from Georgia. She ran for VP with Jesse Ventura.
Wow.
Oh, what a hero. Anyway.
Well, one can only hope that being so extreme will actually backfire on them. It's so obvious and it's so crazy. And, the examples you have these really esteemed people who are experts in their field being censored because it doesn't toe the Biden party line. That's just classic censorship. Mm. But, you might have a problem, too, trying to bring a lawsuit because I don't know. I mean, I believe that technically the First Amendment wouldn't apply to you since you're not a citizen. You don't live in the U.S.
That's also true. I don't really count to your company in Sweden. Yeah, well, I'll leave that for another day. But anyway, I'm curious to go back to that first lawsuit, actually, for a minute, that you were talking about. So you said that the problem was that it was thrown out because you couldn't prove a causal link between government action and the actual censorship. Did the judge give any indication as to the strength of your other arguments? Or was it just a ludicrous thrown out without looking at things? Was there, I don't know, how did you feel?
He wrote I was upset, but he wrote a long decision. So it wasn't thoughtless, but he sort of was at the heart of all of it. So I don't know how much you want me to get into the legalese here, but
go for it.
There's a concept.
I studied law. I'll try and keep up.
Oh, okay. I didn't remember that. There's a concept called standing, which basically it's about whether there's a live case or controversy and the right parties are the ones. You're the one who caused my injury if I'm suing you. So he basically tossed it out on standing. He said that. That one of the components of standing is traceability. So you have to be able to trace your injury to the party you're suing, and then redressability. So you have to show that whatever you want to get out of it, that you could get out of it, if you succeeded in the lawsuit. So he said, because you can't prove that the government is doing this, well, you lose on traceability. And then you also can't show that these people wouldn't be censored if it weren't for the government. Maybe Twitter would have done this anyway. So that was, the redressability. But then he also sort of used it for the more core, First Amendment analysis. And basically a similar thing. It said, the government just isn't censoring their speech. The private companies are, and that's a different issue. So it was all sort of based on that one thing. And, my contention has been he should have at least gotten to discovery. I mean, yes, perhaps there's an argument, and again, I don't necessarily agree with it. There's perhaps an argument we didn't have enough to win based on the evidence we had in the complaint. But like the allegations, well, I shouldn't say that. Like we maybe needed some more evidence to substantiate our allegations to ultimately prove our case. But with the inferences that could be drawn and the inferences at that stage are supposed to be drawn in our favor did tie this to the government. And perhaps we needed those documents, more documents to create that link. But this wasn't the proper stage to throw it out. And if we couldn't get it, who could? And actually, the judge in Louisiana actually said that. Sure, it was different plaintiffs, but it was very similar allegations. And he said, if they don't have standing, who does?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very fair point. So what do you think then? So now the evidence that you've got in the complaint, at least you've got the presence of the disinformation force. I guess you've probably got more statements from well,
in the Missouri, in the Missouri one,
yeah. So then you get the presence of the disinformation force. You've probably got some more statements, I assume, from other government bodies. You got these leaks from the CDC. Do you think that's enough then? Would you be able to win the case on that, or are you hoping for more stuff in discovery?
I think we should be able to win the case based on that, but yes, I imagine since we've gotten discovery, I think there will be things in there. And this allows us to question individuals. So to presumably get somebody from Twitter and say like, did your policies change because of the government? Why did they change because of, what the government was saying? It's a tricky question, but I do think historically it will be clear that we were right.
You would like to think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Generally people who take stands based on like long-standing and well-established principles that seem to have worked for most of the history of the non-violent world. Seems like it might be a reasonable idea. Just stick with the things that have served us very, very well. It's just because it's like, as soon as the government is involved in what you can and cannot say, you're past the threshold that you really don't want to go by. And then before you know it, you can't even see it. It's like a blink in the distance. And you can't mention that you used to be able to say things because, you can't say that anymore, unfortunately. Well, thankfully we can. But, did you see today Nancy Pelosi described China as one of the freest countries in the world?
I missed that. That's just...
She actually said that. Like, I watched the video. She actually said it. Sometimes I see it in quotes. I'm like, are they taking this out of context? Nope. That's actually what she said. So, if she thinks China is free, we're all a bit screwed.
Yeah. Well, one of my clients in the Chengizi case, the one that got thrown out, his name is Michael Singer. I don't know if you were familiar with him. He had a large following, and his sort of main thesis, he even wrote a book on it, was basically that the CCP has been driving lockdown policy around the world and, trying to get Western countries to be less democratic and less liberal in order to sort of bring them down economically and to gain control. And, I tend towards a little bit of a less I tend towards the theory that like a lot of people are just incompetent and stupid. And less towards like the grand plan. But I certainly do think China, has those intentions. Whether or not our people are adopting things because of China, well, that's a different question. But I'm sure he's very interested in what Nancy Pelosi said.
It really depends on who you think is driving the Chinese policy and whether you think it's the same people or not. And it also depends whether you think China were just pushing the lockdown policy to sell a whole bunch of PPE to the world. But I don't know. I think it's to be honest, I think we're at a point where I even saw CNN doing a segment about the continued lockdowns in China and how about their zero COVID policy was really damaging and how it seemed to be more about authoritarianism than health. And I was like, whoa, okay, so even CNN are saying it?
Yeah.
Which suggests that we're at least past the worst of people trying to claim that that was just all about health and not about control, which is nice to know we're at that point at least.
Although they'll also say at the same time, like, well, we didn't really lock down, we didn't really have that. There was nothing authoritarian about what the West did.
No. I mean, it depends where you were. I think it is really your experience of how strict it was really depends. Like even down to like where you were in what part of each individual country, because it like depends how rural it was, depends what the people around you thought. Do you know what I mean? You might have felt if it was way stricter if you were more isolated, whereas people who were all partying together in each other's houses might have not considered things to be that strict.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm curious about a little bit more about the case. So what do you think, what's your like ideal outcome here? Like what do you want from this? Like the US government to just admit it, or?
Well, that would be nice.
You got this.
I mean, what you ultimately want is a finding in a court, whether it's from a judge or a jury, that that this violates the First Amendment and the government can't do this. And I mean, this should be very precedent setting, hopefully, that the government cannot use tech companies, social media companies to accomplish its own aims. That's essentially the equivalent of trying to use print newspaper or whatever would have been, the same sort of functional equivalent 50 years ago, and would have clearly been recognized as a First Amendment violation.
What if the social media companies argue that they're the ones in control and that their massive donations to US government and congressional candidates, Senate candidates, shows that they're the ones that are in charge of the censorship and the US government are simply backing them up? Would that still be illegal?
So that's the problem. I mean, that's kind of that. So that, and again, that's like the libertarians will say that's totally fine. If the tech companies are basically saying, we think misinformation is a problem too, and all we're doing is coordinating with the government to accomplish our mutual aim of suppressing misinformation, then a lot of people would say that's legal. Now, the case law in the First Amendment context isn't great. What's interesting is that there's almost better case law in the Fourth Amendment context. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. I think you guys have something similar there. I believe our Fourth Amendment is modeled after something you have. I'm revealing my ignorance of law, but there you have actually significant law saying like the government can't use private actors to accomplish its aims. So I can't. If Biden can't, use me to go into your house and search it, even though he doesn't have probable cause or a warrant. So those principles should also sort of carry over in terms of the government using private individuals to accomplish its own aims, in my opinion. And one reason it kind of maybe didn't develop that much in the First Amendment context is because we didn't have anything like this before social media. So it's really all sort of new terrain.
Yeah. Does this like sort of say one was to believe that there is like a web of corporate power in America where a bunch of different companies are the leaders of a bunch of different industries, and due to massive donations and monopolies they hold and the amount of money they spend on advertising and propping up the corporate press, we're very much driving the policies of America. It kind of seems to me right at this second that this is really dangerous in that there is basically like no way to legally prosecute them for violating free speech rights because it's all private companies. Like, is this the same in a lot of other like areas of governance? It's just kind of concerning me now because we're like because we outsource so much, and because like private industry and the government have become so intertwined. Like, is it becoming like really difficult to prosecute because that relationship is so close that you can't quite tell who is what and what's being carried out by who?
Yeah, and I would say that this actually is sort of reflected here. Again, that's one of the problems that we're up against. I still think it's clear that this is, the federal government driving this and it's a First Amendment issue. I do think, there's a broader discussion to be had about, even if it is coming from the social media companies or they're, sort of working with the government, this needs to be addressed in the modern era when they're controlling the public discourse. And one of the arguments actually that's in the Missouri lawsuit is that Section 230, which regulates, it's actually designed to shield these companies from liability for censoring people. That allows these monopolies to grow. So that was sort of government propping up certain companies, allowing these, Twitter and Facebook to sort of dominate the public square, the modern public square. And then now they're saying, oh, these are private companies, they can do whatever they want. So that's actually alleged in the lawsuit too, that there's government action involved in all of it. And therefore this really can't just be considered, private companies acting on their own. And I think that's, you sort of look, it's kind of obvious. I mean, you would have more competition. It would maybe be easier people have tried to start alternative platforms, like Parler, Gab, Getter. They don't really take off. They tend to be like right-wing echo chambers, so they're not really as interesting for someone like me.
Yeah.
I don't really want to just be in a right-wing echo chamber.
Yeah, no, I have the same problem. Like, I'd love there to be an alternative. That's why I was so pumped when I thought Elon was going to buy Twitter.
Yes, I know.
It's like at least something might be interesting. It might just not be increasing amounts of censorship. But we'll see what happens there. Actually, how much do you know about... Actually, no, wait. We'll get to that in a sec. I just wanted to ask. So basically, in the lawsuit, you're essentially not just alleging that the government was leaning on these platforms to possibly, censor people or have people removed for stating certain things. That you're also alleging that because of Section 230 being in place, that it allowed the monopolies to grow up, that actually meant that the censorship that they were imparting was far more impactful. And it was because Section 230 has allowed these companies to become the massive monoliths that they are in each of the different spheres, that has meant that their censorship is more consequential or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly, you got it exactly. And so that's not really a separate claim. That's just sort of in the facts, sort of painting the picture of how this is really a government enterprise, or at least government using these private companies to accomplish its aims. So the main violation is the First Amendment. There are also claims that are maybe less are less interesting to most people, but about sort of these agencies having the authority to do what they're doing. It's called ultra-virus action. They're, like the CDC is supposed to prevent the spread of disease. Is the CDC really supposed to be telling Facebook to censor Naomi Wolf? That sounds a bit outside of its purview. So those are sort of tangential claims.
Well, I mean, I hadn't actually considered it like that, but CDC need to get out of that space immediately. Is there any precedent of I don't know, say wartime, governments leaning on newspapers maybe or something to not print certain stories? My head's flashing the Pentagon Papers, but then obviously
Pentagon Papers.
Yeah, but then they published them anyway. Yeah, they published them anyway. Yeah. Is there any other precedent that you can not even rely on, but is there any history where the government has gone to court for trying to censor people, basically? Via a private company, I mean.
Yeah, so the porn industry is one. There are a number of cases that come from that where the government was threatening booksellers, for instance, if you keep selling these books, we're gonna, you'll face legal consequences.
Wow.
There's one called Bantam Books, and there the court said that basically that wasn't okay. It's not exactly the same thing, because there was the book companies that were suing, so that would be more the equivalent of Twitter suing. So I do think, if you had Twitter or Facebook suing the government and saying they're coercing us, that would be a very successful lawsuit. Part of the problem is there's this sort of, causation chain issue that we're facing, which again, I mean, I want to be very clear. I think we're absolutely correct. I think this is the gravest First Amendment violation that I would actually say, I think I can say unequivocally that this country has ever seen. I mean, in terms of suppressing really valid debate on the most important topics of our time. And I think that we have enough proof now to make our case. But again, not everybody agrees.
Yeah. So like say this was successful, and then in the future we have some other crisis, or I don't know what's going to happen. Pick your mad natural disaster, or I don't know, whatever madness comes next. The alien invasion. That was next on the calendar, right? And,
that would be.
And people start publishing, information about the aliens. Like the government welcomes them with open arms. They have a big press conference on the lawn of the White House. Someone gets beamed down, and then there'll be some reporters being like, "We shouldn't trust the aliens. Like, don't trust them." And they start posting, information about, or misinformation about the planet that the aliens were from, and like. Then social media companies get lent on to by the government again, sends them being like, "Oh no, you can't be saying these bad things about our new friends. We don't want them to blow us up." But is there ever like a way to like rapidly deal with these issues, or is this always something that's come in like 2-3 years down the line? So say there'd been the precedent for this sort of case before COVID hit. Would it have been a simple thing then to just say, actually, you're in violation of this, like, case law? Or would it always take this long to build the case?
It would be easier. So, I mean, you can get what's known as a preliminary injunction, and that's where you basically, if you show that there's the law is very clear and there's irreparable harm, then you can, get before a judge really quickly and, get something. So yeah, one of the issues is that this is also novel. It's raising sort of novel factual issues, not to mention, legal theories. And that's part of the reason it's taking so long. So yeah, if we had some precedent, that would definitely help next time. But I think, to go to your point about the whole misinformation thing, I mean, this is, why we don't have the government involved in deciding what's true and what's false. I mean, some of the things people are saying about the vaccines are not true and arguably are somewhat dangerous. I mean, saying that no one should get the vaccine and they have microchips and they're killing people right and left is not helpful information, and it's not true. Likewise, it's not true that the vaccines are good, that everybody should get the vaccine. It's a good cost-benefit analysis for everybody, and that they stop transmission effectively, and that, the truth lies somewhere in between those two things. But once you start to allow the government to decide that, that first thing, that the microchip isn't true, well, then where does it stop? Where do you draw the line? And that's why we have government stay out of this altogether. And so, you can say maybe some people are harmed because of people who said crazy things about the vaccine. That's unfortunately the price we pay to live in a free society. And we have to, we have to trust our citizens to be intelligent, to be able to sort through the information they're given. And it's very confusing times. Everybody's exposed to so much information. Nobody knows what to believe. But the government hasn't done itself any favors by suppressing the voices of very credentialed people and then repeatedly claiming to have a handle on the truth when it clearly doesn't. If the CDC, if Rochelle Walensky and Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins want everybody to listen to them and to believe what they say, well, then they should be more credible. But they've repeatedly lied, made claims that weren't backed by the evidence, and then are at the same time coercing people and silencing the voices of other scientists. So that's just not how you gain the trust of the American public or the public at all.
Yeah. I mean, I keep going back to the way you put it there. It's just like, as soon as you allow the government to get involved in this kind of business of just telling people what they can and cannot say, then you've created a power that can decide that it cannot be criticized, or that its policies can't be criticized, and then it is no longer a government in a free society. It's like on its way to being some sort of totalitarian regime. And it always reminds me of the Benjamin Franklin quote, actually. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
Yeah.
Which is, scarily true.
Yeah.
Even though it was 265 years ago.
Yeah, I know. I actually had that as my background quote, I think, for a while on Twitter. Now I have something about free speech by George Washington.
Yeah. So, we've got like 15 minutes left. So I do want to ask you about the Twitter thing, since I brought it up earlier. Like, how much have you been paying attention to Elon Musk trying to buy Twitter?
A little bit. I know the deal fell through. I'm not exactly sure why. Seemed too bad.
Yeah.
I noticed again, it seemed like some censorship was decreasing for a little while, and then it went back up when the deal fell through. A lot of people have been getting suspended recently.
Yeah. What do you think that was? Do you think they really stopped? Do you think this is just like some weird, like Mandela effect, where we're all thinking that, for some reason that everything is now, that the censorship was stopping? Or do you think they really were just like, crap, right? We start turning off all the shadow bans. This is like, we've got a clean house. We've only got a month, like running around like that SpongeBob meme where they're tearing like filing cabinets out.
I maybe, I don't know. May very well be.
I really hope so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then we can spend the last 15 minutes like just talking about freedom of speech, because yeah, from a legal standpoint, like, do you consider that to be like, when I look at it as the First Amendment, I'm like, does that mean it was the most important? Like, do you consider that to be like the most crucial part of the U.S. Constitution?
I think so, yeah. I think Dave Chappelle said the First Amendment is the most important, and the second is there in case the first doesn't work out. Second Amendment is the right to bear arms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, being able to debate, I think there's a reason it's the First Amendment. Being able to debate about the most important issues of the day it's crucial. And, yes, technically, as we've discussed, the First Amendment only applies to the government. So, again, you can't make the argument that private companies can't censor speech. But in terms of sort of moral and practical concerns, the idea that silencing your opponents or silencing speech that you don't like is the way to go, I think, is deeply concerning. And I think, and I've talked a lot about this recently too, this is sort of cancel culture, which is a huge problem here, where people are, have a different opinion about some topic and they're deemed bigots and their careers are ruined. And so one big one today is if you think that maybe there is there are two genders, there are two sexes, and most people are one or the other, and there are probably some individuals who have some sort of in between or identify not as the person they were born as, but generally speaking, there are two sexes. That's considered hate speech by a lot of people today. Or if you think, maybe trans women shouldn't be able to play in women's sports, that's another one. Which people say isn't a real thing, but a trans woman just won the swimming championship. And trans women, especially if they went through puberty as the way they were born as biological males, they're stronger. They have much more muscle mass, so they're going to win. And this is sort of depriving women of what we've fought for quite a long time, to be able to have some of our own territory. And, and winning a competition like that has also practical implications, like scholarships and financial rewards. So I might be wrong on this topic, but the fact that I'm called a bigot and, just completely smeared, and that's, another form of it, it's chilling in the societal context where people don't say this. I've decided I just say whatever I think now. I don't care. But
yeah, COVID did that to quite a lot of people, I think. They were just like, well, fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, it does. And you, to your point, like it's so important that we can talk about things, because like even if we disagree, you're just like I think the cancelling has made people less willing to listen to people who they disagree with. And I think we're at this point where there's this really weird thing happening where I don't think anyone who is like being tribal about any issue actually understands the other person's argument. Yeah. I like, not that they don't agree with them, not that they've not like listened to them. I just think they straight up don't understand what the other side is talking about. It's like, yeah, we've already gone super controversial. It's fine. It's like the abortion debate. Like one side literally thinks you're killing children, right? That's what they think. Yeah. It's like whatever you think, right, is fine. But like they believe that you're killing children, and like at least concede that that's what they think, and you might like suddenly like not consider them to be the worst people on the planet as soon as you realize that they actually think you're killing children. Like
right, and and you're exactly on point there. I mean, they keep talking past each other because and then the left says, you don't care about, we will not be controlled, and women will not allow us to make medical decisions and blah, 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 it's about our freedom. I mean, if you don't acknowledge that the other side, and again, like I'm pro-choice, I'm very open about that, but if you don't acknowledge that the other side's argument is this is a life that has its own rights, then you can't have the debate. And so the sides just keep talking past each other. And frankly, who's winning from all of this? It's the establishment politicians who keep using these as wedge issues to turn the public against each other, both sides against each other. So I personally, I mean, maybe it's a little bit conspiratorial on my part, but I think they both are very happy with things the way they are. And this, allows them, the working class can actually come together. They've managed to sort of splinter, like race issues and class issues. So they've sort of turned everybody against each other when those sides could be working together to create better conditions for the working class, which is what the left used to be about.
Yeah. No, I think I don't think it's conspiratorial at all. I think that the reason they haven't done anything about it, because like Democrats, they have the majority in the House, they have the casting vote in the Senate, they have the presidency. They can no longer sit there and claim that they are powerless and they are doing nothing, essentially, to advance any of the things that they argue to be the most important. And they don't. Yeah. They've done nothing to attempt to reconcile it. Nothing to attempt to like even appease some people. Like it's like they want your money. That's it. They want your money for fundraising. Like that's all it is. Yeah. And the Labour Party in Britain they're meant to be, they're in the same position. They want your money because like they elected a guy who was, shall we say, fairly hostile to the left of the party, and they've lost 200,000 members. Like that's a third. Yeah. They've lost a third of their membership because of that, and now they want your money. Now they're like, we need a fundraise. Look how bad the government is. Look how bad they are. The government that they basically agreed with for 2 years. Look how bad they are. Give us some money. That's basically how it goes down. Unfortunately, it's a touch sad. But what do you think's going to happen in November?
I think the Republicans will win. I'm less certain they're going to sweep it the way that I thought they would have before the abortion thing. I think that some people maybe want to vote Democrat because they want to preserve, right to choose, which would be done through more Democratic legislatures. So I'm not as confident as I was, and I want the Republicans to win, not because I really like the Republicans, but because I think that the Democrats, I have more hope that the Democrats could potentially,
do some good things.
Once again, be the party of the working class, and they need to be sent a message that closing schools, disadvantaging poor children, ignoring people's natural needs like the needs to socialize and get cancer screenings and attend substance abuse treatment, and breathe without a mask on and make their own medical choices, that's not going to get them anything. And I think that if the Republicans don't win, they're going to get the message that this is all okay what they did for the last 2.5 years. So, and it wasn't exclusively Democrats. There were plenty of Republicans who embraced these measures, but it sort of broadly fell on the Democrats. And they've just been so extreme. There's still places where they're masking children in schools. A bunch of, Democratic strongholds are mandating the COVID vaccine for school children, even though we know from, in D.C., D.C. has the strictest one now. They, even though Pfizer's own data says that the vaccine doesn't stop infection in children 5 to 11, which the New York Times acknowledged, but still we have to mandate the vaccine for them. When the virus poses a
this is what, like, I'm baffled sometimes when they think of the lack of lawsuits. Like,
yeah, well, I actually looked at it. I'm sort of waiting. I have my eye on it in DC because where I'm now living. They seem to be. It appears to me that they're going to grant any exemption request. So it's almost like a suggestion, but of course what this does is it coerces the less informed parents, maybe the non-native English speakers, the parents who don't have time to call me up and do their own research and figure out, all I have to do is make up something and I don't have to get my kid the vaccine. So, it's actually the Washington Post came out with an article the other day saying 40% of black kids won't be able to attend school because of this mandate. Of course, the Washington Post solution was, well, we better get those kids vaccinated ASAP so they can go to school, rather than, maybe this mandate is a bad idea. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, if people are denied exemptions, then I would definitely look at a lawsuit. And one of the other issues is when they came down with this mandate a few weeks ago, I was sort of looking at it, and everybody, all the parents I talked to were seeking exemptions. So that earlier concept we talked about, standing, I wouldn't have anyone who's standing if the exemptions are granted. So I need someone who's not going to seek an exemption or who was denied one, and then I could, potentially pursue a case. Of course, I have other reasons I'd have to evaluate. I can't promise.
Yeah. But yeah, here it is from a couple of weeks ago. DC to require students 12 and older to be vaccinated against COVID-19 this fall. Wow. Yeah. 12 and up. Like, it's because over here it's done. We're finished.
I know.
We got bigger things to deal with.
I know.
Not that we're dealing with them, but there's bigger things to deal with. Oh, anyway, Jenin, that seems like a good place in which we can wrap up. So is there anything of yours you want to direct people towards? Your Twitter? I don't know, maybe the lawsuit?
Sure. So the lawsuit, feel free to follow it. It's called Missouri versus Biden. Very exciting. It's actually like Missouri ex Corral. Eric Schmidt is the Attorney General of Missouri versus Biden et al. That's in the Western District of Louisiana. My Twitter handle is Lefty Lockdowns 1. It's a long story, shortened from Lefty Lockdown Skeptic. It makes it sound like I'm pro-lockdown, which I'm not. But it was lovely talking to you again, and I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely. And good luck with the lawsuit.
Thank you.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. If you want to leave us a comment, that would be awesome. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.